Good morning, everyone. Yes. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Roberto Cascella. I have the pleasure to moderate this session. So there are going to be 3 different presentations. I go straight to the point. So the first presentation is by Shubham Singh, who is a lead engineer in Intertech Accurate Labs in India. So he's going to present a topic that is Linux kernel security assessment for CRA compliance. Please.
Hello everyone, I'm Shubham Singh. I work as a lead engineer over at Intertech Accurate Labs. I am based out of India, Mumbai. And I'm here to speak about your Linux kernel security assessment for CRA. This is the agenda for the talk. All right, so this is the agenda for the talk. I've kind of tried to segregate the talk into 4 pillars, right? And I've tried to map them with what your CRA typically requires. So I think we are here for CRA, so I think most of this we already know. But essentially, the critical part of this is that your CRA, it separates 2 annexes, right? Annex part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is essentially what your product has to be. It has to be secure by design. It has to have minimal attack surface. It has to have data protection at rest, everything. And now your part 2 defines the processes that you have to follow. So your vulnerability identification, documentation, your remediation, everything that is under your part 2. Now your classification matters enormously, right? Because most Linux-based products would probably fall under default category and can self-assess using module A. But if your product is an important product, say it is a firewall, an IDS, a router, an OS, it likely falls under the important category, which requires your third-party conformity assessment. And it will have to go through a notified body. And the penalties are obviously significant. This timeline as well, I think most of us already know about this, but the critical portion of this is September 11, 26. So this date, I hope everyone remembers this date, because this is the date after which vulnerability reporting becomes mandatory. So your 24-hour early warning, 72-hour notification, the entire thing comes into warning. And the critical part is that this applies to all products deployed within the EU market. So this is not just for your new products. If your Linux-based device is deployed in Europe today, you need to have your reporting infrastructure operational by September 26. And if you think it is far away, it is not. So the preparations should begin now. So let's come to the reality, right? So Linux runs pretty much everything. Linux runs an enormous range of products that are a subject of CRA, and each category represents a different kind of risk. Now, for example, class 1 is say consumer IoT. So smart cameras, your wearables, smart home devices, these are resource-constrained devices which are probably running on limited memory, and users either never have to or they don't have access to configure the security settings on this. So on these kind of devices, your secure defaults are pretty much everything. The good news is that most of these are probably under default category and can self-assess. Now your network equipment, right? So routers, switches. So here the full networking stack is exposed. So every compiled in protocol is your attack surface. And these are high value targets, which is why they are classified as important under CRA Annex 3, which means that here you will need a third-party conformity assessment. Your industrial OT, so your PLCs, HMIs, SCADA systems. So the defining challenge in these kind of devices, I think, is the life cycle of it. Now, these devices may run for what, 10 to 20 years? And your kernel support strategy has to support that. Because if you look at a lot of standard kernels, they might support, what, 4 years, 5 years kind of thing. So you have to ensure that your kernel runs for at least your life cycle of a product. The key insight from this slide is that although the underlying Linux kernel is the common thread, but how you evaluate, how you harden it, it has to be tailored to each device's risk profile, constraints, and deployment lifeline. So the way Sauron said, it's one ring to rule them all. One approach here does not fit all. So this is the framework which I was referring to. I've tried to segregate it into 4 pillars. One is secure by design, vulnerability management, your supply chain transparency, and lifecycle maintenance. So what I've tried to do is kind of map them to each of the portions of your CRA requirements. So we'll go into each pillar one by one. This I will skim over quickly because we know ECSO is already a vehicle for CRA, but I was I think this is a useful part in this because if when you look at OS and you look at protection profiles, so NIAP already has an OSPP which provides a baseline for a lot of consumer-grade operating systems. So your Red Hat, Ubuntu, they're probably already certified against it. The problem might be that these are not the assurance level that your CRA may require, and I'm hoping that since there are already schemes underway that to upgrade your PP to meet CRA requirements. So I'm hoping that would soon be possible. And your ST, right? So security target is probably the most important document I feel because this is your product-specific document. It defines your toe boundary and exactly what is in scope for your product. So which kernel version, your services, firmware, everything. So this is probably something that is, we should very carefully look at. And if you look at assurance level, although PP is EL1, EL2 plus is something that I would recommend to go with for CRA. And I know that a lot of people recommend on EL4. So technically, you could still go with EL2, but you will have to augment the hell out of your STs if you want to go with that. So EL4 might be better, but we could potentially also go with EL2 as well. So this is probably one of the most important slides. So what I've tried to do here is map the requirements, the SFRs, with Linux and the corresponding CRA requirements. Now, the point 2b, it requires your secure by default configuration. Okay, so this could map to your FMT class, security management class, and in Linux, this would mean your kconfig defaults, your sysctl configurations, all your module blacklisting to ensure that no unnecessary, no unused modules are enabled or used within your kernel. Second point is protection from unauthorized access. So this could map to your FIA and FTA. And within Linux, we could implement this using, say, SLinux, AppArmor, SMAC, whatever your implementation of choices. Data confidentiality, this could map to your FCS, your cryptographic services. So that's your cryptographic API. We could use your DMCrypt with loops for disk encryption and KTLS for transport and IPsec. Audit logging, data integrity, this could map to IMA, right? So this is your IMA and EVM. So IMA is your integrity measurement architecture and your extended verification module. So both of these, they provide your runtime file integrity verification. And also we could use DM Verity if you have a read-only file system. So say if your system runs a SquashFS file system, it is probably read-only, where your DM Verity might be useful. And FS Verity for managing your individual file integrity. Audit and logging, this directly maps to your FAU. So your Linux audit framework already has audit D, it has kernel logging buffer, everything. So this is fairly straightforward. The important part is that every one of this mapping has to be documented, tested, and has to be traceable in your ST. Moving on, kernel hardening. So this is also something I feel, so there's a lot of data here. I will try to go through it quickly. So step one, probably the most important one, is baseline. So start from a minimal kernel def config, right? So don't use what you don't need, have only what is necessary. Include only the subsystem that the product actually requires. Because every kernel option that you enable is an attack surface that you have to maintain and you have to defend, okay? And step two is enable self-protection mechanisms. So this, I was having a talk yesterday with a gentleman. So we were trying to establish how do we prove this. So pretty much all of these mechanisms are inbuilt within Linux. You could enable stack canaries, you can enable stack protection, you can enforce your space address randomization. But the problem would be how do you prove this? To ensure while you are doing this, also have auditable evidence to show that these mechanisms are already enabled. Step three is reducing the attack surface, obviously. So actively reduce your attack surface. Disable all the network protocols which we do not need. So your DSCCP, SCTP, everything. Your unused file systems, your unused debugging interfaces, which are not needed by the end users, they could also be disabled. Your legacy exec, they could be disabled, everything. Because everything that you disable here in this step is outside of your evaluation scope. And this reduces your attack surface. And enforce integrity, right? So enable your module sigforce so that only signed kernel modules can load on. Also enable your lockdown LSM, because this would allow that even root users, they are prevented from modifying the running kernel, which is also critical for your CRA requirements. And step 5 is deploy SLinux AppArmor to enforce each running mode. And these policies, this will be scoped to your product's specific service set. And validate your audit logs. Now on the right, if you see There are certain device-specific considerations because when you go for security, a lot of time reality intervenes. So a consumer IoT may not have enough RAM, enough memory to run a full SA Linux, and that is acceptable. But that has to be documented, the deviation needs to be documented, and a risk justification has to be provided within your ST. So this is how we could handle your real-world constraints. So this is your target of evaluation for a Linux product, right? So starting at the bottom, your hardware platform, so your SoC, your TPM, secure element, these are outside of your TOE, but still they need to be documented as a part of your environmental assumptions. Now above that is your bootloader, secure boot chain. So if you boot or grub, if that is within your control, if you control the bootloader, then they are a part of your TOE. They probably are most of the time, but yeah. Above that, you see the core, the Linux kernel and its modules. So these are always in the TOE. So this will include your kernel configuration, your modules, your LSM, your crypto API, IMA, everything. Above that are your systems and application layers, which may be included a part of your ST if they are enforcing any of your SFRs. So on the right-hand side, there's a process to define this, which I've tried to define, but I would like to point to the point 6, right? So identify all interfaces that cross your TOE boundary, because every network exposed service, every IPC mechanism, every debug interface, that is your attack surface. So they either have to be hardened or they have to be removed. And your CRA purposes, your technical documentation must have this TOE definition and rationale for every boundary decision. This is also vulnerability management. I think we know a lot of this. In the interest of time, I would just like to skip over this. So, but yeah, the 24 hours early warning, 72 hours your full notification, and within 14 days, we have to provide a full root cause analysis, your remediation status, and lessons learned. But for severe incidents, I mean those without a specific identifiable vulnerability, this deadline may extend to 1 month instead of 14 days for the final report. So this is CV handling. So I mean, if you are using Linux kernel and you check any vulnerability database, there are dozens of CVs every month for every kernel. So without a structured process, your vulnerability management might become unmanageable very soon. So step 1 is probably monitor. So track your upstream kernel advisories, your Linux distros, OS security, everything, and cross-reference them against your component inventory. Step 2 is assess, and this is probably the most important part for every CV. So determine whether that vulnerable code was actually compiled within your TOE kernel. Because is the affected subsystem even a part of your product TOE? Because since we have started with a minimal config, if we are able to establish that the vulnerable component was not a part of kernel at all, the CV automatically becomes not applicable. So saves your time as well. So generate a VEX document, obviously, and document your assessment. And next is prioritize. So say your CV is vulnerable, your CV is applicable to your product, but you have to score it based on your product context. And this is critical because same CVE, which is deployed in 2 different kind of product classes. Assume a device, a network firewall versus an air-gapped sensor. So both of these, the same CV, although exploitable, will have different CVSS scores. So prioritize based on your product context. And step 4 is remediate. So you have to backport the upstream fix and validate it against your hardened configuration. As per CRA requirement, you also have to provide the security update separately from your feature update. So wherever technically feasible. And the last part at the bottom, like I said, your compiled kernel is your first line CV filter. So is the vulnerable component even a part of your TOE or a part of a kernel? Because if that particular line of code, particular section is not in your kernel, it automatically becomes not applicable. So the fewer subsystems compiled in, the fewer CVs you need to assess every month. Next is supply chain transparency, right? So the CRA mandates SBOM for Linux-based products. That inventory is probably deeper than most people realize. So on left, you see what you need to capture in a Linux-based product. Your kernel isn't just Linux 6.6. It is a specific version, a specific patch level, an LTS branch with specific configuration which determines what subsystems are compiled within your kernel. So SBOM has to capture the kernel config hash as well, because two products that run same Linux 6.6 but with different kernel configs are fundamentally different products from a security perspective. You also need to inventory the loaded kernel modules and their versions, signing status, your build environment, compiler versions, everything. The minimum scope is that you have to have only your top level dependencies within the SBOM. But I would strongly recommend to capture transitive dependencies as well, because this SBOM would also allow you during the CV mitigation status to see whether a CV is applicable to you or not. Your SBOM would probably be your first line of filter as well. So probably have your transitive dependencies within your SBOM, generate at build time, never manually, and version update with every release and security patch. Like I said, the key principle is that your SBOM has to be accurate enough that when a CV is published for any component at any layer, you must be immediately able to determine whether your product is affected or not. This kind of shows why one-size-fits-all approach fails. So I've tried to classify 3 different kind of classes. So one is your consumer IoT, which runs a stripped LTS kernel, a network router, which runs a full Linux stack, and an industrial controller, which might be running a preempt RT kernel for your real-time scheduling. So the firmware row, if you look at it, that's where the things get hardest. Now your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth camera firmware in consumer devices are most often very opaque binary blobs. And your NIC firmware, your ASIC firmware within your network equipment, and the field bus control in industrial devices. These components cannot be audited for security, but they still need to be inventoried with provenance information. So when a Wi-Fi firmware CV drops, you need to know within hours which of your products is affected. So each column represents a different kind of SBOM depth and complexity, and your inventory has to process and has to be calibrated against that particular device category. So this is also one of the most, so CRA 0.1, right, 2F, it requires you to protect the integrity of stored and transmitted or otherwise processed data. So with these portions, we should be able to provide integrity verification across the Linux stack. So first is build time integrity. So if a third party can take your source code and configuration and provide and produce a byte identical binary, that is probably your strongest integrity proof. So your SBOM is most accurate when it is built during build process, but you also have to document your compiler flags. So your stack protector strong, your fortify source, your REL, RO flags, all of these have to be a part of your SBOM during build time itself. Next is your boot time integrity. So your secure boot chain that would establish your trust from hardware to kernel. So your measured boot via TPM, that would attest the integrity of each boot stage, which would create the verifiable evidence of what is actually booted. Your DM verity, if you are running, say, an access point or something like that, which has a SCOSH-FS file system, which would be non-modifiable. So your DM verity, that would provide your block-by-block integrity verification for your read-only file systems. And this is probably essential for a lot of embedded Linux products as well, where the root file system should never change at runtime. And your LSMs, they will restrict your kernel module loading to only those that are present on the verified root file system. Next is runtime integrity. So your integrity measurement architecture, this can provide you file level hash verification at access time. So every time a file is opened for execution or testing, IMA checks its hash against a sign policy. And EVM is your extended verification module. So this will protect your metadata, your permissions, your extended attributes, SC Linux labels, everything. So together, they ensure that even if an attacker gains access, they cannot modify the system files without detection. And signed kernel modules via module SIG-force, they would prevent loading of unsigned or modified modules. And the audit framework would log all the integrity violations, therefore creating a compliance evidence trail. So I think this 3-layer kind of satisfies the CRA's data integrity requirements and supports vulnerability handling as well by providing an auditable record of exactly what software is running on each device. So lifecycle management, right? So this is probably the section where most manufacturers struggle. CRA requires that your product has to be maintained towards for the expected product timeline, and definitely for a minimum of 5 years. So 3 areas that I think we need to optimize. One is patch delivery obligations. So first is your security patches. They have to be free of charge for the entire support period, and they have to be separate from your feature updates wherever technically feasible. So, and CR is very explicit about this. Also, the thing is that you have to have automatic security updates enabled by default, with user being able to opt out of them. And you also need documented patch SLAs. So for Linux-based products, this means that you need to have the capability to backport security fixes to your deployed kernel version without pulling in feature changes that might break your product. So that's a significant engineering capability that OEMs have to commit to. Next is your technical documentation. So everything has to be retained for 10 years, and that is after the last unit is placed on the market or support period, whichever is longer. So this would include your risk assessment, your ST, your every version of SBOM, your all vulnerability handling documents, everything, and end of life process. So this is probably very often overlooked, and CRA requires it. So you have to communicate your support timeline at the point of sale. So the product must be labeled with its expected support duration. You need a consumer transition plan for when support ends, and you should consider open sourcing components as well. And the hard truth is, say, for example, if a product runs Linux kernel 6.6 LTS, it is supported approximately around December 26, but the product has a 10-year expected lifeline. So after the LTS lifecycle ends, you are expected to provide kernel maintenance beyond the upstream support. So that's a major commitment that has to be planned at the design time and not discovered during the end of life. So your kernel version, so that is a compliance decision with a multi-year consequence. So the first is unsupported. So assume that right now your kernel is end of life. It is straightforward non-compliant. So no security patches can be provided. CRA conformity is impossible. So this automatically becomes non-compliant. Second is, say your LTS kernels, if they have 2 to 6 years of support window. So this is viable if this fits your product life cycle. And next is your vendor-supported kernels. So these typically support 10 or more years of maintenance, and enterprise distribution, they would support even larger support cycles. And fourth is self-maintained folks. So this is highest technical burden on your team. So if you are choosing to have a kernel that is end of life, you have to commit that you provide all the vulnerabilities are patched, and you have to provide evidences for it. So every patch, every backput, every security fix, this requires a dedicated kernel security engineering capacity at your facility. So putting it all together, so I think I don't have a lot of time left, so I will just skim over that. The key takeaways, right? So if there is something, maybe this you should take away with this. So point one is, Linux kernel is the common thread across all device categories. But your hardening, they would depend on your product context. And your methodology already UCC is in force. So common criteria methodology provides the structure. So we do not need to reinvent the compliance, define your STs, map your SFRs, and CC should be sufficient for us to provide this evidence. Part 3 is your kernel configuration. So this is your most important security document. So every compiled subsystem is your attack surface. And every disabled options, it narrows your vulnerability scope and reduces your assessment burden as well. So treat your file with the same rigor as you would your security target. And point 4 is September 26 is months away. So vulnerability reporting for all products already in the EU market. So if you do not have your CVE monitoring assessment, your process has to be operational, or you are non-compliant on day one. And last and most important thing is, choosing a kernel version is like choosing a 10-year commitment. So because match your kernel's life cycle to your product's lifetime. Because unsupported kernels automatically become non-compliant. So I think that was all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Checking if there are any questions. Yes.
Hi. Is it on? Yeah. My name is Gus D'Souza, and my question to you is with regards to many robotics applications, they run on ROS. And particularly, because it contains many dependencies on the operating systems, many solutions are containerized. I would like to hear from you some considerations with using containers to, for the application layer and to harden that application layer, if possible.
Thank you so much.
I feel that this is the theme of this event has been that people have a lot more questions than they have answers. So I did not think on the containers front. But yeah, I mean, I can get back to you on this. I don't have an answer for that right away.
Okay. Thank you. Checking if there is any other question. No? Thank you so much. The next presentation is from Lars Hanke. Yeah. Good morning, Lars. So Lars is a senior security evaluator at Deutsche Telekom Security, and he's going to present asset flow analysis.
Yes.
Please. Thank you.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My talk may be a bit technical, so who is in the room who has experience with common criteria, so I can adapt? Also, it's a majority, so you will probably be able to follow. So, what do we mean by asset flow analysis? When you're talking about attacks, there's one thing that you should know. There must be something to get when you do exploits. We talk a lot of stuff about, well, we have to protect here, we have to protect there, and we always see these combinations where we have a nicely locked front door with nothing behind, and then there's a small storage at the end where there's not even, so there's a shack without a door where all the values are. And especially when we're looking at more complex systems, so we have heard about an entire Linux kernel or even containers in a Linux kernel, it is very often, when you talk to these people, it's very often very difficult to find out where are these assets? What is the point where we want to attack? And so first point on the slide is there's no use to break into an empty house. So when you want to devise an attack, you need to know where the assets are, when they are there, and of course in which format, so what to expect. And when you consider common criteria, this is not much of a deal. So when we look at the security target, we have the security problem definition where we talk about assets, of course, and threats to assets, and then we detail down finally to SFRs, and all the rest of the common criteria process focuses about SFRs. So the idea is, of course, if an SFR is broken, then probably some assets are exposed, and usually this is the case, but not always. And what's even more important, we come to that later, is, well, you can do a nice analysis up front, and then you finally find out, well, it's probably different here and there. And so for that reason, when you do vulnerability analysis, you usually do something like asset flow analysis. But even beyond common criteria, even if you don't do common criteria, this is something very basic you should use in every security analysis for whatever system you have and for whatever criteria you're working with, especially if you cannot see the system at once. So the idea is same thing. So we always hear we have some security stuff, so we store our stuff in a vault, and then of course, well, it's nice if this stuff is stored in a vault, but you do something with it. It's not locked up in the vault for all the time, because then it won't be useful. Nobody will be ever able to see it. So the question is, well, how does it get into the vault? So just consider a key for cryptographic stuff. So we encrypt everything. It's an answer we hear all the time. And well, where does the key come from? How does it get into the system? And when it's taken out of the vault, so you have it in the TPM, for example, but well, you need to get the key out probably to decrypt something, and then it's maybe available. And who is entitled to do that? And where is it then processed? And these are very important questions with often are unanswered when we are talking to clients. So another issue which is poorly reflected by common criteria is TSF, which are not backed by a real function, but by design. So when you look at the picture here, you have two distinct boards in the same device, and when you have two distinct boards, there's obviously no communication between these two, and this is a design feature which has no testable SFR in common criteria. So when you do ATE, there's nothing to test, and of course this is where where the architecture investigation is for, but what we found out is there's no real work unit for that. You find this here in the SEM application notes. Design properties are distinct from security functionality expressed in Common Criteria Part 2 SFRs because they largely have no direct observable interface at the TSF. Rather, they are properties of the TSF that are achieved through design of the TOE and enforced by the correct implementation of that design. So it's a pure design feature, and there's nothing to test this. And for that reason, we do this kind of asset flow analysis. And to talk about this, I want to define a couple of terms. So the assets are the assets that we also find in the security problem definition. So this is more or less the user data that we process in a device, the data that you want to protect. Then, of course, assets have some representation. So assets are a logical term that is not something that can be immediately put into bits and bytes. It could be well, we can think of something like XML or DER or whatever kind, so there's a certain kind of representation on the technical level. And so what we do usually then to protect these assets is to put them in some kind of container. So we may encrypt confidential data, or we may sign data that should not be changed, and so on. So, and then we consider when we have these assets in these containers that they are safe. So when we have encrypted data, nobody can read it. If we have signed containers, then nobody can change the data, and so on. And but of course, this generates a new class of, well, in proper CC terms, TSF data. For people who are in this business as long as me, we still know terms like secondary assets. And so these are what I call here asset proxies. So let's just consider a key for a door. You say you lock up the door, and then nobody can get into the room. That's okay. But then you have this asset proxy for your door, which is the key. And so what do you do to the key? If you hang the key at the side of the door, it doesn't help to lock up the door. That's the simple conclusion here. And so you have, of course, to take care of the asset proxies as well and figure out where are these? How do they get into? And of course, you can do this iteratively. You can put a small vault at the side of the door to lock up the key, and then you can just have another key or maybe a combination for the vault or whatever. Here we also find this, that you have keys for various, so cryptographic keys for various applications. You have, then you put them into a secret, in a secret storage where you encrypt another time, then you have another key, and so on. So you get, you run through all these processes to figure out where are all these things. And then you do this, of course, not in a purely logical environment, but on your implementation level. Where is it? Where are these software modules? Which chips are involved? Where is it actually? And then I took the term tainting. I don't know if anybody knows Perl. Perl has this nice feature of tainting input. So you have input, and before you haven't parsed it, it taints every function where it comes. So you cannot easily use probably malicious input from outside. And so this is something like, the idea is the same. Wherever your assets pass by, you mark your subsystems, your chips, your software modules, whatever it is. So this is something that is important. And at this point, of course, when you look at something like what is security enforcing, what is supporting, what is non-interfering, what is even probably marked as non-TSF, well, that's quite simple. You see it. You see if there is an asset and its process is probably enforcing. And if there's something, if there's an asset in a non-TSF subsystem, then it's probably a wrong association here. And the final term here we need is the term of an operation. So this is simply what you can do with the device. So the idea is you look into the guidance document and say, well, how should the device be used? And you start by all these operations. So this is, a matchstick man of such an analysis. So the idea is here you have some system. This is of no use what it actually is. So you get some data inside where we have in yellow asset proxies. So the data comes in, is probably TLS encrypted. So it should be nice, should be secure. And then you come to some TLS module where it is decrypted. And then it's somehow processed. We get some answer from the application layer. It goes back and goes out. So you have the user data that you want to protect in these in this red stack from TLS, web server, and application. But as we see, for doing the TLS decryption, we need keys, of course, and probably the application does something interesting. So we probably have some kind of encrypted database, and so this also need keys. So you have another module, which is a key server, which injects the keys there, which is also something that's tainted red. And the database, again, even if it has no direct communication with the external world, it contains user data in encrypted form. It has some, it has asset proxies. And then you finally find out there's a backend which you use to manage your application. Well, but this never gets in touch with any user data if you did a good design, of course. And then this can be finally a non-TSF module. And of course, when we have asset proxies, well, we also look at the idea what happens when we go up when we do the boot process, for example. So you have the keys in the key server. So how are these keys stored there? Are they stored in plain text on some file system? So do we have it on a hard drive, or is there something else? Do you probably during ramp up, you need to insert some kind of chip card which has a key, and you need to enter PIN and so on, and then you would go through these modules as well. So what I did is for various protection profiles and security targets that I'd edited recently, I tried to formalize this for common criteria. And so there's ADV-ARC, which is the development aspect of the architecture. And so in the standard common criteria, there's only ADV-ARC.1, which has the notion of this kind of how the architecture supports the how the architecture supports it, but which has no in-depth work units for that. And so the idea here was to extend this to include an asset flow to verify where all these assets are finally, and thus to support the idea of security by architecture, by design. Some things like these two separate PCBs, for example, but also other techniques, especially for information flow control. And when we look here, what we have, so there is the first, of course, because it's a purely hierarchical structure, the first elements are exactly the same as for ADV arc.1. But then we add some requirements. So we add a content requirement that the security architecture description shall demonstrate how the implementation of the architecture enforces TSF and protects the assets from threats. So this means that the vendor or the developer shall deliver his own asset flow analysis. It's not an economic work for the evaluator to put together an asset flow analysis, although we usually do. It's a good idea if the developer who knows or should know what he's doing puts together this analysis. And then it's for the evaluators to analyze if this analysis is complete. And so this is the evaluator action here. The evaluator shall determine that it is complete and coherent with the implementation. And finally, the evaluator shall verify that the goals are actually achieved. So how does this look when we look into work units? It's not all of them. So the first one is number 6. So the standard goes to number 5. So we start at number 6 and we go up to number 10 here. So I omitted some. When we look at the work unit 6, the evaluator shall examine the security architecture description to determine that it presents a complete asset flow analysis. So this is, we should check something like these pictures we've seen before, that each operation is included, that everything has been tainted correctly, and that we can follow the ideas of the developer. So this is just to tell, well, the asset flow analysis provided by the developer is complete. And then we do some things, and when we look at the last two, the evaluator shall examine the security architecture description to determine that it is consistent with the TOW security domains. This is a very important point. When you look at the ADV arc.1 requirements, then the developer has to name security domains. And of course, he claims that these security domains are somehow segregated. And well, if you read the text from the SEM, it says that in the application notes especially, that you have to verify this, but there are no work units for this. And this is actually the first work unit for this. And when we look at 2-10, the final one, the evaluator shall examine the security architecture description to determine that it upholds the TSF. So this is really the core part then for the evaluator to examine whether the claims made in the architecture, and I've seen a lot of architecture documents making a lot of claims, but this is the actual work units where the evaluator shall examine if these claims are really sound, if they are upheld by the design. And so we will see how this works out. If we actually look at the SEM, there's an application note which requires this, but well, there's no work unit for this. So what we do here is we join two paradigms. When we look at the standard common criteria, as I said at the beginning, the idea is that we have a security problem definition which is mapped to SFR using objectives in the middle. And then the idea is if we did everything correctly through all these rationals, then these SSR are both sufficient and necessary to counter the threats mentioned in the security problem definition. So the focus is on an a priori analysis of the issue. And well, if whoever has ever evaluated a security target knows that we do a lot of effort there, and it works in most cases. And then when we go to the vulnerability analysis and look how the SEM motivates this, there's not even a mention of assets anymore in the entire text. So it all focuses on the SFRs. And so when we do something like architecture where there's no SFR, which are not backed by SFR, which are testable functions with testable logic, then it's not considered in the formal way of EVA-VAN. So usually evaluators look at this, but there's no formal way for that. And another thing where we always have trouble is when we come to redundant protection. So when you come to an idea like you have two random number generators. So in case one is compromised or broken, then you XOR them together, and then you still have random numbers, except that both die at the same time, which is not that probable. The question is how would you do this in a standard common criteria way? So if you have two FCS RNG and you have broken one, then your system is broken. Here you could have two, and you could look at the assets. You could also do something like you have one FCS RNG, which is the combined of the other two, but how would you then evaluate this? So, and here the asset flow will help you. So the asset flow looks at the other side. So we track the assets, which are defined by the security problem definition. We track how they run through the implementation, and then we identify the potential vectors on how we can attack these actually, and then we look finally how this works in the implementation. And so we can draw a complete map of attack targets, which is the necessary input for the vulnerability analysis, and especially we see if something was not considered in the conceptual phase of the security target generation. And this happens when the more complex the systems become, the more difficult and the more complex the asset flow analysis will be. So this is an incentive for developers to design easy or, say, systems that can be segregated. We have heard a lot of the Linux kernel this morning, but this has a major design flaw. Everything of the Linux kernel runs in the same process space. So when you go back, there was a long time ago, there was a concept like new herd, probably somebody heard of that, where you have a microkernel, and all these services, which are kernel modules in Linux, were services running in the user space. So in a different security domain. And so if your IP stacks blows up, it doesn't affect the microkernel. And this is something that would be easily seen when you do an asset flow analysis, because when you have the operation, something runs through the through the IP stack. You have a red box for the IP for the IP part, which is in user space, but you would have a yellow kernel because it only sees proxies, and this is a great thing to visualize these things. So why should we care? It's always the most important question. Of course, there's the formal issue when we do ADV-arc.1, it is actually too unclear if we do some TSF by design. And there are no work units which consistently verify domain segregation. So this is something where common criteria actually lacks something. But this is something where which is internal to common criteria, and we are here talking about European Cyber Acts, where common criteria is probably a very important building brick, but it's not all of it. But actually, something like asset flow analysis is an established technique in high security applications, especially for classified material. When we look at the EU Commission with 2013-48, which handles all the classified material. Then we have tried it out in the PCI scheme since version 6. And well, it was a very valuable input. Unfortunately, in version 7, the scheme deemed that it is too complicated for developers to describe how they implemented their stuff. So now the evaluators shall do this. It's still a very helpful tool, but it won't bring the developers to make better products. And when we look at something like 2019 881, then it may even be necessary to do something like this. When we say the goal is to protect, store, transmitted, or otherwise processed data against accidental or unauthorized storage, processing, access, or disclosure during the entire life cycle of the ICT product, service, or process. Well, this is exactly what the asset flow analysis does. It shows you where it is stored, transmitted, or otherwise processed, and if it can be attacked at this point. So especially for all these for all this accidental, maybe unauthorized, but especially it reduces the point of accidental attacks. So where are we? Currently, I have 2 security targets which use this. They are currently under evaluations, and I'm writing a protection profile on behalf of the European Commission, which also uses this. I expect evaluation reports by the end of this year, beginning next year, and then we will see how the certification bodies think about the common criteria of formalization of asset flow analysis. Asset flow analysis itself, as I said, is already part of confidential material and for PCI. And so I'm at the end, and hopefully time was nice.
Thank you so much, Lars. We have time for questions. Yes, I see 2 questions. Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Yeah. So I'm Augusto Velasco from Brightside. I have a question because I kind of agree with the approach you've taken. It's something that, as you said, somehow is already done. But then again, I don't understand, because I have maybe a different opinion on ADB-ARC, but I don't understand how it fits exactly or why it doesn't overlap with non-bypassability analysis in some cases. But my question basically is, why didn't you create a different family at the end? Why put it on the ADB-ARC?
Well, why should I do a different family? Because the SEM, it is in scope, actually, as you said. The non-bypassability should cover that, but there are no work units for that which actually enforce that. And if you look at several products and how these were evaluated, if you look at the reports that you see there, well, it's not done. And I've been involved in several ETSI and other standardization processes where there were a lot of evaluators telling that when there's no work unit, they will not do something about this. We had a large discussion about application nodes. So where's the work unit that tells us that application nodes should be heeded? Of course, in Germany we do that, but that doesn't seem to be a common ground for all people.
It is in my opinion, but okay, because I was going to say maybe there's no word unit, but there's always the scheme behind it. Asking
Yeah.
it, oh, yeah.
Thank you. And there is another question there.
Thank you. I'm Tyrone Solat from Oracle. I'm also on SC27 Working Group 3. I just wondered if you had any plans or had already planned to submit this to ISO for a future version of CC. Because I would do it early if you're going to do it. Even I wouldn't wait for your evidence because ISO is really, really slow. And now is a moment when they are taking inputs for the next version. And you'll also get a lot of scrutiny because it'll get reviewed by a lot of people in different countries.
Absolutely, I'd really liked this. I actually talked to the BSI a year ago or so, but they were so busy that it probably dropped under the table. Well, of course, yes, we should probably head for that.
Yes, I'd recommend doing it. I think because I think there is a call for comments open for the next version of CC.
Yeah.
So I think now is a very good opportunity if you want to talk to BSI again about that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you so much. And thanks. Let's thank again Lars. Thank you. And the next speaker is Michael Messer from BSI. And he's going to present fast common criteria assurance continuity after product updates finally gets real. How to use patch management in ISO ACTS 9569 efficiency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
How does this work? Okay. Okay, bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Meissner. I am a certifier for BSI, and that is the governmental certification scheme in Germany. Thank you to you all for being here and to listen to this presentation. I will tell you about patch management, which is a new way of dramatically increase the speed for recertifications. And I have been here yesterday already, and I found that this is quite a valid topic in this context of this conference, because I've heard yesterday several tracks, and even today, my Vice President, Thomas Kaspers from BSI, mentioned several times the need for updates according to the CRA requirements. And he also mentioned that these updates need to be security certified. The patch management, I believe, will help in that process as well, because it will increase the speed. I have been a certifier for 24 years now, by the way, which tells you a lot about my career, or the lack thereof in BSI. But I'm not doing that for a career. I'm doing it for the passion and for the motivation, because before my BSI time, I worked in industry as well. So I believe I still have some, touch and some sensitivity about the requirements in the, I'd say, real world. And I hope that I can bring that back, even though I'm now working in the government. And I think fast recertification cycles are one part of it, because for as long time as I am a certifier, I have heard these complaints about the common criteria, that it takes too long, it's too costly, and I can understand the motivation of these complaints, because it is true. But the common criteria is a very powerful criteria, and to my knowledge, it is the one with the highest security statement, with the biggest assurance statement there is in all the IT security criteria, and that does not come without a price. You cannot have it for free. If you want to have high security and high security assurance, you will have to invest in something. But the common criteria is so powerful that if you need shorter cycles, that you can lower the assurance. The common criteria can do that. Choose a lower EAL, for example, and you will have shorter times. But patch management will finally be a methodology that actually will shorten the recertification cycles and the re-evaluation cycles without lowering the assurance. And this is the most important part. The assurance should not be lowered. And as I said, I believe there will be many more recertifications, because under the CRA, there is also the requirement, and we heard about that yesterday, for vulnerability management, vulnerability handling. That means once a product has a certification, then it will have to, match and follow the possible new vulnerabilities. They have to address, they have to be disclosed, they have to be mitigated by patches, and to maintain the assurance, they will have to be recertified. As a certifier, I strongly believe that the recertification, the number of recertifications will increase. Anyway, if I just had to shorten my message today to just one core message, I decided in the preparation of this presentation to bring this in the very beginning of my presentation, and that is, if you write or update common criteria protection profiles, please include the assurance family ALC-PAM. That's the one that is defined in the ISO document into your protection profile. Because why? The EUCC does not only, mandate vulnerability management. No, also it somehow limits the original flexibility of the common criteria for some products and for some assurance levels, and mandates the use of protection profiles. And if you have a product certified according to a protection profile, but also if you want to have it, fast recertified according to patch management, you might run into compliance issues concerning the protection profile if it does not have included ALC-PAM as a component. So if you only take away one message, maybe out of two, I'll have another plea to you later on, then please keep this in mind. I will introduce you into three parts of my presentation. First, I will introduce you very briefly into the ISO document that defines patch management. It has the number 9569, and I am here on a very particular high pressure because I see some of the creators of the patch management document here in this audience. I am merely the messenger, but I am not the brilliant mastermind behind the ISO document. So, of course, actually I can say something that will please the creators. And if it doesn't, please do not, hesitate to interrupt me and to say what I should have done better. Secondly, I will introduce you briefly into the pilots that we have done with BSI, and I'm also immensely proud that I see the sponsor, the representative of the manufacturer of these pilots here in the audience as well. It's even more pressure for me. And the last part in the end is I will tell you about the advantages and the prospects that we have. And perhaps part 4 might be this being the last presentation before the lunch break, and lunch will be served right behind that door. One objective will be to not let you be the last ones in the line for lunch. And if I should get too carried away, please interrupt me and say that I should stop. I had yesterday and today already several talks with some people in the networking breaks and also in the actual presentations, and I am quite tempted to maybe alter the verbal presentation today from what I have written down 2 months ago in this presentation. I'm not sure yet. We will see how it goes. I will just try to stick to the thread in the presentation and maybe elaborate here and there and leave out some slides somewhere else. Okay, I will go to the ISO document about patch management, and it basically covers 2 topics. First of all, it is the formal definition of the requirement for patch management. And secondly, it describes in an informative way how we could use patch management. With we, I mean not just the certification body, not just the evaluator, but also the manufacturer and even the user of the product. And this is part 2. And it is not mandatory, it is informative. And patch management comes in 2 steps. First, there is the initial certification. It is like any other certification. There is a first and baseline certification that covers all topics of the common criteria as they have been selected. Only with the difference now, additionally, the evaluator will evaluate all the processes about patch management as they are defined in this ISO document. And then secondly, with the benefit of assurance into the general processes of patch management at the manufacturer, then we have efficiency to do fast-track re-evaluations, recertifications. Patch management is all about using as many efficiencies as we can. It's not on compromising assurance, it is on cutting down everything around it. If you want to say so, it is making less formal the evaluation process. The initial evaluation has been formal already. It is a requirement, also mandated by the common criteria, but the recertifications can be therefore a lot of faster. And there are several efficiencies. I hope that I will mention most of them here in this presentation. We do not have so much time. Anyway, patch management has 3 requirements, and one advice. One requirement is there is a dependency on another common criteria family called FLR2. FLR stands for flaw remediation, and these are the processes between the user of the product and the manufacturer of the product when it comes to communication about possible patches. There is a dependency to that. Then the product should have a kind of an update function. After all, it is patch management, and there should be updates involved because somehow the patches have to come into the product. However, I wrote should, I did not write must, and I had some talks about this already because the common criteria is very broad and can cover any kind of IT security product. And the same should happen for the same should be said about the ISO document. There are more and more products that have a real justification why they do not have update functions. For example, if you have a security product which is just a library, it's usually not updated, it's just replaced by the administrator, loaded by a new version. Or you have more and more apps, and apps might not have their own update function. Maybe they depend on a third-party update function from an app store. And I think these products should not be excluded from the benefits of the patch management. I think there are more exceptions, and this is actually still debatable, but I know that the godfathers, the creator of the ISO document, they actually had products with update functions in mind. But, what counts is the experience afterwards. I had discussions, and I think there is a kind of a justification about, also including, products without an update function. If you do the right justification in the security target, there are, I think, more and more real-life experience with patch management when we go along. And my actual plan is, perhaps, and I already asked one of the creators of the ISO document to maybe have a combined presentation of these quirks and these special experiences with patch management during the Common Criteria Conference this autumn, end of September, beginning of October in Rome. And that, of course, provided that until then there is enough subject, enough matter to talk about, provided that actually the possible presentation will be accepted by the panel, provided that the creator of the ISO document will actually join me in the presentation, and of course, at least also if I get permission to go to the conference. So I should actually speed up another prerequisite, another requirement of the patch management is that the evaluation body and the lab remains the same. I think this comes without saying. It has been the same for all recertifications, otherwise you cannot do reuse. And then there is a strong advice, if I may say so. This is the outcome of the pilot. It is that the initial evaluator and the certifier should remain the same as a team for all following patch re-evaluations. Because we have learned about each other, we have learned about the product, we know the product, so we can actually use this as another means of efficiency to speed up all the recertifications of patch management. The document, like I said before, I will give you a very brief introduction into the ISO document. It has two charming properties. The first charming property of the ISO document is it is not long. It has something like 40 pages. And I don't know how you feel, but whenever I read new documents these days, even if they're just informative, none of these documents has less than 80 pages, maybe 100 pages, maybe even more. I believe it's like a contest between the authors of documents to make them as long as possible. Maybe it's good for the career, maybe it's good for the bonus, maybe it's good for the reputation. It is certainly not good for me as a reader. And if I even manage to read through one of these documents, in the end, it happens very often that I have the feeling, maybe it could have been compressed on maybe 20 pages. That would have been much more efficient. So I encourage you, please go through the ISO document. It has 40 or something like 40 pages, and they are all informative, and they are really thrilling to read and to understand due to their coming to the point, cutting the cheese. The first interesting chapter in this context is the chapter 5. The chapter 5 of this document actually defines the ALC-PAM family, and it defines all the evaluator work units around the patch documentation, about the patch decision-making, about the patch development, the patch testing, patch release, and patch distribution. So you see, this is all oriented about processes. It's like a process-oriented part of the life cycle evaluation. But once this is done, you'll have assurance into the patch processes of the developer, of the manufacturer, and then you can reuse these assurance that you gained through the initial evaluation by fast re-evaluation. It's another kind of efficiency that we make use by the ISO document. There is chapter 6. Chapter 6 extends some of the existing common criteria work units. To give you an example, if there is a work unit that says, dear evaluator, please test the product, then chapter 6 would extend this work unit to, dear evaluator, please test the product and the patch. So, and this is already, the end of the ISO document, but it's not the end of the 40 pages. There are some annexes. There are 4 annexes, and they have also the charming property that they are informative. They are not mandatory. They are not, an obligation. They are a mere suggestion of what to do. The Annex A, for example, is a kind of, I would say, brainstorming for everybody who is related to patch management. It can be the user of the product, can be the evaluator, the manufacturer, and the certification body. In our BSI pilot, we used some of the options, not all of them. You see in bold letters the ones that we used. So we used a kind of a certification processes limited mainly to the security flaws. And the manufacturer also used some, ways of describing the evidence as the documentation. Here, actually, by the way, we have another efficiency of the ISO document, and this is cutting down the documentation. Documentation is a very big part of, the formal processes, and here I think we have the justification to cut down because all the relevant evaluation documentation has been already written in the initial certification, so it is existent. So we cut down on it as much as we can in the fast re-evaluations. Another option that we decided to follow is a re-evaluation by the same evaluator. And I mentioned it before, we also said by the same certifier, because this team has been established, there is a trust between both teams, and it worked. There is another option, use of patch documentation according to one of the other annexes. And I will tell you about this kind of documentation in one of the next slides. There are some more annexes. Again, they are all informative. None of them is binding or mandatory. Some guidance on how the manufacturer could design the documentation for describing the patch processes. And there is an example or a suggestion on how the actual patch documentation for the re-evaluation can be, can be written. And here, maybe a spoiler to the pilot, the manufacturer decided together with the evaluator not to write dedicated documents, they have a special name here as well in the documents, but actually just to retrieve completely automatically, or mostly automatically, Herr Meister, the patch documentation from the design tools, from the configuration management system, from the bug tools, from the release notes, etc., etc. The evaluators determined that this is just the sufficient information that they need for their evaluation of the patches. The last annex that I want to mention is a suggestion on how to describe the function in the security target. So you should have a to update functionality, and the ISO document gives some examples how that could look like. And then there is a part in the security target that is called the SPD, security problem definition, that should include some description of the patches as well, the threats, the assumptions, etc. And this part of the document just gives some examples. And also, in the pilot, the manufacturer decided not to follow this example, but to create their own description in the security target, and I can only stress it loud enough, this is fair enough. It's perfectly acceptable. It brings me basically to the second charming property of the ISO document. It is non-binding, it is flexible, and this is another degree of efficiency, which I believe is the secret for success, because every IT product is different, and every constellation between developer and evaluator is different, so I think it is a very wise decision by the creators of patch management that they leave all the options open. If patch management officially is included into the EUCC, I really hope that there will be not too many regulations that limit the freedom freedom of the patch management. If it is too much limited, if we are forced to do some things that might not be perfect in one specific context, then I think this limits the chance for efficiency. So I think keep the patch management document as it is, wait for the real-life examples from the following pilots and the following applications, and then see where can it be improved and where can it be, made more precise. At the moment, I feel quite happy with the patch management documentation as it is, because it gives so much flexibility and so much freedom. I cannot stress it strongly enough. I have written it here before, given the different TOE types. Everybody knows when I say TOE, I mean product. And the varying security requirements for patch functionality, the ECSO document does not specify a fixed set of functional requirements. And it does not specify a very limited way of, getting the assurance. I am coming to the pilot. The pilot, we decided, and I think this is a wise decision, that we treat, the patch management process as assurance continuity, as maintenance. That has the result that the original certificate will remain valid. It will just be extended by the addendum that describes the patches and the new version of the product. It also has the consequence that the validity of the certificate remains mostly 5 years, and theoretically, during all those 5 years, the manufacturer has the chance to apply for patch management. Maybe at some point in time it does not make sense anymore. If the first application comes after 3 years into the validity time, then there are only 2 years of certificate validity left, so maybe it's not really, very beneficial anymore. Also, evaluator and certifier didn't do anything with the product for 3 years, and we need to get into it. So at some point in time, we'll have to trade, whether it is sensible to actually do patch management or to do a real recertification. This is the process how it went in the pilot. The manufacturer sends the application and sends the impact analysis report, the documentation about the patches, the security target, and a diff to the security target, but he mainly sends it to the lab because the lab needs it to prepare a work plan and an evaluation plan. And then the lab presents his work plan and evaluation plan to me, the certifier. I usually say, no, this is too brief, this is too short, because as a certifier, I have the natural tendency to be very conservative. I want to have everything documented and maybe even twice documented because I want to secure myself, But the evaluator said, no, I will show you in the next slide. I can dig into it, but then you would miss your lunch, and I don't want that. So then we perform a kickoff meeting with the manufacturer if he wants to. I believe when in the future the patch management processes happen every few months, then maybe not every time a kickoff is really reasonable or necessary. So, but this was the first time ever in the world, so I think a kickoff was really appreciated by all sides. Then the evaluator does what the evaluator do. They did the re-evaluation. They deliver the documentation, including the technical report to me. There is the necessary review loop. Then I do the comments, because as a certifier, I usually do not follow what the evaluators meant to say. It's my problem, not their problem. I approve the ETR. I write the addendum to the baseline report. It is published, and voila, that's it, finished. And we can do that very fast and very quick without too many formal overhead. Let me jump. Here, this is fine print. I don't know if you can read it. This is where the evaluator and I had a discussion. The evaluator said, here, Mr. Meissner, or did he say Michael? I cannot remember. Here, the security target does not change except for the new version of the product. The design documentation does not change except for the patches, but the patches are already covered in the patch documentation. The guidance did not change. The life cycle documentation did not change. Why should we update evaluation reports? And they convinced me, yes, actually I had no justification why they should, so we left out everything. The only documentation that they actually updated was the focus of the evaluation, and that is doing all the tests that are required. So they delivered a new test report, and they delivered a new AVA analysis, a pen test report, a CVE analysis, and a threats analysis, and then, of course, the ETR, including a diff, because the ETR was generated from the old ETR, so that I can see all the changes, which eased up my work. this was the milestone plan that they explained or that they showed to me after the kickoff. There were some theoretical evaluation activities, and then they decided to have a workshop at the manufacturer site. Why? Because there is a geographical closeness between the lab and the manufacturer. This was the best possible approach in this case. And again, the ISO document allowed us all degrees of freedom to actually, pursue any kind of evaluation that we deemed appropriate. Here it was a workshop. The evaluator team went to the manufacturer site for 1 week. They did a detailed source code analysis with the designer itself. They did a testing delta workshop. They repeated and executed new and old independent tests. They did the same with the pen test, and they updated the documentation. That was the contents of the 1 week workshop. I hope, or I am convinced, that with these fast cycles, we can have many more fast recertifications, and we can keep the assurance, up to date. And the expectations, this is already part 3 of my presentation, is of course to have assurance with maybe higher planability, but certainly faster and more efficient. And we want to shorten the re-evaluation cycles and the recertification cycles because, like I said in the beginning, this is the main critique on the common criteria. And we have a big and wide landscape of different certification possibilities. Now, common criteria is not the only one anymore. Others are, by default shorter because they cut corners and maybe they have a lower assurance. And this is just the assurance that is still required by the CRA. But the common criteria shall still play a role in the future. And this is only possible if we include patch management, or I should say precisely, if we include very fast and very efficient recertification cycles, if we are prepared to do compromises. Compromises on the process, I need to repeat again, not on the security. So we want to make fast re-evaluation possible for everybody. We keep it flexible for every kind of manufacturer, for any kind of product, and we want lean processes. We do not want a formal overhead. Please keep in mind, this comes from a certifier of the German scheme, and us Germans, we are infamous for being formal, sometimes I like to say. But no, it's only possible if we are getting less formal. Yes, cutting on documentation, another efficiency. I mentioned it several times already because we have all the necessary evaluation documentation already established in the initial certification. We do not need it in the patch management processes. It is the end of my presentation. It's been 26 minutes. Now we have, I think, 5 minutes for questions, but also behind this door is going to be the lunch served. So I do not want to stop you from your lunch. I suggest that, and I will not be angry about it, we make 2 groups. Those people who like to, have a head start in the lunch queue, you are welcome to actually leave now. The others who want to ask questions, please come to the microphone, and I will not go for lunch before I have at least tried to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mikael. I think you made my job easy. So I don't know if there are any questions. So, yes.
Yes, thank you. I hope that I do not hinder anybody to go to lunch, okay? So, my name is Nils de Kampe from Confidas in Germany. We work with a variety of developers to pursue their common criteria certifications. Before I come to my criticism on this standard, I'd like to mention I'm a big fan of this standard. We do that in almost every new certification that we do. Indeed, we are doing a few of these together. So I think it goes into the right direction. However, for the sake of this discussion here, I'd like to point out a part where the standard falls short from my perspective. Every year, every other year today, we see vulnerabilities in product that are so severe, like talking about log4j and stuff like that, that developers merely have any other chance than like hitting patch now, right? So this is the thing they have to do. On the other hand, we have regulations coming from the Cyber Resilience Act saying they have to do that within, they are discussing things like 48 hours, right, to pursue a patch. And then we have developers in this market who operate under legal obligations to have a certified product.
Yes.
In the German law, indeed, we do have many, many places where it says you have to operate a common criteria certified product.
Yes.
And while I understand that this process now brings us closer to this, patch management still takes us, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know, best case to achieve an update of the product.
Yes.
So I understand you can't answer that, but I know the
Yes,
author of the patch management is also here.
Please ask the question so that I can answer before lunch starts.
So, question, I'm sorry for the statement, but the question is, like, what should these developers do today?
Yes, it's a good question. It's the wrong person to ask, but actually there have been discussions like that, and I fully agree, and maybe this will be a topic that I think I would like to address, if he agrees to it, with Mr. Fritsch. He's one of the godfathers of the ISO document in the Common Criteria Conference in Rome. What I want to say is this is a question targeted to the regulators, and I heard some perspective of it already yesterday in the special topics, parts, and I can say, yes, we can still do patch management. However, that brings me to another, plea or another beg. Patch management, as you learned today, will only work when the certificate is valid. If the certificate, if there is a maintenance phase of after the certification, and if there should be processes established to withdraw certificates, then patch management cannot work anymore because it only works on an existing valid certificate. So there is still a lot of discussion. What you mentioned is just one more point. So I think, like I said, actually, I have to prepare to have to do compromises as a certifier. It's not easy for me, having, my nature as a certifier. But I think also the, regulation entities need to see the real life situation. And yesterday, I got the impression, because industry and regulators talked together in panel discussions, and I heard both sides. I can see the intention of the regulators, and I can see the real life, pain and threat of the manufacturers who have, worldwide, markets, and they just need to come together. There was a panel discussion called, harmonization, and I think this would have been the best place to actually ask this precise question, because you from the consulting side for the manufacturer and me from the certifier, I think we have this common problem together, because it's not threatening just you, it is threatening my whole work, my whole existence as a certifier, because certification only works if it makes sense and if it is possible. And I have the, feeling that the regulating authorities, they see that, the whole complex, rules of the CRA have been established widely in, theory, and now we see the practical execution of it, and there will be confrontations, and there will be loops to really adapt it. And this is what I hope. I am very willing maybe also to participate in these gremiums, but at the moment I am just a small certifier, but I see and I hope that I can contribute in the same way.
Thank you, Michael.
Exactly 20 past.
Just checking if there is any other question before. Yeah. No. Okay, lunchtime. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah.